When I went from law enforcement, I decided I wasn't going to live off of my real estate income. So I didn't want to touch it. I wanted it to go right back in the business to be able to purchase more. And I still don't live off of it now. It just goes right back in the business and we buy more real estate as soon as the deal arrives. And whenever we're looking or somebody produces something that's very interesting and looks like it would be a good buy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the journey to Multifamily Millions. I'm your host, founder and CEO of Zana Investments, Tim Little. And on today's show, we have with us William Parmer. William is a real estate investor, coach for Master Passive Income, co-host on the Breakthrough Investor podcast, and successful entrepreneur. William, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much. I'm very happy to be here and excited.
And it is great to have you. So I just want to say that I always love having fellow vets on the show. So thank you for your service.
And yours as well.
I'm sure you'll get, I'm sure you'll get into that. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can tell us more about your background and really how you got started on your real estate journey.
Yeah, I'd say the real estate journey, it started when I was really young. I didn't start doing it myself until probably, I'd say around 2020, somewhere around that time frame. But as a kid, I watched my dad buy a couple houses and we're very hands-on ourselves. So we would do the remodel, the paint, all that stuff, and then we would rent it out. But I realized that when I was much older that they actually did it wrong. But they basically bought it and they didn't hang on to it. They just did self-management, which not a lot of people are cut out for self-management. And I don't manage my own. So if that tells you anything, like I don't want to do it, I'm happy to pay other people to do it. They're good at it. If I'm trying to follow the 80-20 rule, that is definitely that 80% for me. It's not something I enjoy. But so that's where it got started. But for me, a little bit about my journey. I went into the Marine Corps at 18 years old and was active duty for about five years and 4 months, if I recall. I had a very odd enlistment. I had an extension. So the standard is either 4 years or 8 years. And came back home. I ended up getting married 4 days after my official separation. It was a long time planned. And then I went back to the family business of house painting and could not stand it. Like hated it. Very good at it. Just did not dealing with customers. And so I, being a new husband and having to learn how to be a husband and provide for my family, I was like, I want to do something I enjoy. And I was one of those guys, like I really, truly just love getting a good adrenaline rush fairly frequently. So I was like, I understand the mentality. Let's go try out for the police department. And did that for about 2.5 years or so. And during that time, COVID happened, and I was realizing that I was working night shift. I had 2 kids at this point, and my wife would have to leave the house for 5 to 6 hours a day just so that way I could get some sleep to operate at night to be functional. And it's not a state you want to be in where you're just functional. You want to be completely awake and aware of what's going on. So during all this time, I was realizing I wasn't allowed to do my job. I wasn't allowed to go stop cars, go on calls that were not like serious. So I realized I was listening to a lot of music, and I decided I need to actually do something educational because this is a 12-hour shift and it's at night and I'm not allowed to do anything. I can't sleep. So I'm going to listen to some podcasts. And then found Dustin Heiner on Spotify. Master Passive Income is his podcast. And he had probably 200 episodes, 220 episodes out at that time. And I binged every single one of them that I could. And probably 8 hours of podcasts a night, pretty easily until I got through most of them. I'd say it took me probably 2 months, 2.5 months. But I realized that things that really drew me to him were, one, he's a Christian like myself. He's a family man. He's married. And he was doing this not to be wealthy. He was doing this so that way he could have freedom. He could have time. He could raise his kids the way he wanted to. He could be there for them. And that really grabbed me. And I realized that I qualified to be a student, and cue me applying and going through that whole process as a student under his coaching. So that's how that really started for me. And I'm a big advocate of being coached and having coaching. I'm actually looking at some potential coaching for myself later this year. I don't think you should ever stop being coached. There's always so much more to learn. And I am a big advocate of actually paying for coaching, because if you're paying for something, you're going to utilize it more because it's costing you something. And I think you retain knowledge a little bit better. At least I do. And yeah, so it took off from there.
Awesome. We're going to get into some of that stuff. I really like how, and some of these things when we're growing up, we don't recognize the things that we're learning until later in life. And then it's a kind of in retrospect thing. Like I never really thought about real estate when I was a kid,
Yeah.
right? Like it was just one of those things. But then in retrospect, I would look at, oh, okay, yeah, my parents climbed the real estate ladder, right? They started an apartment, then they bought a condo. Condo rose in value, but appreciated quite nicely. They were able to make enough money to buy a house. And so in retrospect, I could see all the benefits and the potential in real estate, let alone like what your dad was doing with actually buying properties. And as far as self-managing goes, I am with you.
Yeah.
I owned my first property was a duplex, and because it wasn't local, I couldn't self-manage, right? But once I did a 1031 exchange into a triplex here in St. Pete, then I was like, all right, I'm going to self-manage because it's only 20, 25 minutes away. I have no excuse not to.
Mhm.
But I quickly realized that I had every excuse not to because it's not fun, but you do learn a lot, right? Whether you like it or not, you have some interesting conversations and experiences dealing with tenants, especially different demographics and stuff like that. Just the issues that happen, you can't make half this stuff up. But I did learn a lot in terms of the problems that tenants have and how you have to deal with those problems. And I think it certainly gave me a little more empathy for property managers. I think that's inevitable if you ever try to self-manage.
Oh yeah, and I would say if you go the route I did, and just I've never self-managed. Like we have an Airbnb, but we manage that one
Mhm.
because that one's literally 5 minutes down the road. My wife handles all of the guest stuff because I am not great at that. She's very kind and very generous and very tactful. Some of the things that I lack, she's very good at. But those are the only things that we actually manage. And my version of that is she just tells me when I need to go fix something. But yeah, in the coaching that I did, one of the biggest things was I live in kind of an expensive area, and it's easier than some places, but more difficult than what I wanted to actually buy rentals that actually cash flow. Because
Mm.
I think when you start, like when I started, and I still invest for this over anything else, but I invest for the cash flow, not necessarily the appreciation. The appreciation is the cherry on top, but I want
Right.
the cash flow. So when I started, I realized my area is a little bit costly to actually get some good cash flows. What I went through with Master Passive Income as a student and now as a coach is we teach people to go out of state. So my first house I bought was in Ohio, and to this day I've never seen it, and I have no interest in seeing it. Really could care less. The one time I actually went to Ohio after I bought it, I was 30 minutes away, and I just decided it was not worth my time to drive 30 minutes. So, but that's how
Awesome. So
yeah, that's how I got started. That's how I got introduced.
yeah, and so what kind of properties are you buying? What are you looking at?
So mine's like a mixed bag, but starting out single family rentals, the first one, it was listed for 84,000. It's a little under 1,000 square feet. So a little bit smaller than I typically would encourage people to go for, but it was listed around 84, 86,000. And I walked on that deal twice, if not three times, and ended up getting it for 62,500. And
Nice.
it ended up renting for $1,000. I put 10 grand in it, refied out, left a couple of grand in it just because I wanted more cash flow. And
Right.
now that property, it was cash flowing. And then by happy circumstance, my property manager was looking out for me and raised rents for this, but I asked him to raise the rents for this something else as well, like $50 here and $50 here. And so it ended up, by the time we got done, it's renting for $1,200 a month currently, and it cash flows nearly $600. And we've had a tenant in there for 2 years. Anytime anything goes wrong, we fix it. Like I don't wait around. I like to take care of my tenants, but had a really good property manager, and vetting the property managers is one of the big things that we teach our students how to do and what to look out for and the bad things to keep an eye on when you're doing that process. So
Yeah, and that's huge. I would argue for almost any type of property or any size of property is vetting that property manager. The other thing that you brought up that I think is really important, especially for those folks who are just starting out, is the target market, if
Very
you
much.
want to call it that,
Yeah.
right? The path of least resistance is obviously to buy in your backyard, but it really depends, like you said, where your backyard is. When I first started getting interested in real estate, my backyard was Washington, D.C., and it was prohibitively expensive. So I started looking out at like concentric circles out. Where are those affordable areas where I had enough to put down on a property, because all the banks were requiring 25% down for a non-resident occupied
Mhm.
investment property. And that's a significant chunk of change. So I had to go a couple hours out in order to find that. And that's okay. It's just, again, you have these steps that you go through, right? Is there anything locally that I can afford? If you live in a cheap area, then hey, go crazy, right? It's always easier if
Oh
it's
yeah.
10 minutes away versus 2 hours. But if not, you have to be willing to go outside and start thinking about that third party property management, because it's just not feasible
Mhm.
in 99% of cases to manage it yourself if it's more than, I'd say, an hour away. Even that's probably a little much, but definitely anything more than an hour, you have to have that third party property management so that they can respond to the tenant needs, because you don't want to be driving at midnight to
No way.
go unclog somebody's
Yeah, it's
toilet.
not
So
gonna happen. I tell them to wait till 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, even if it's Monday. But which means in that retrospect, I would not be a great property manager at all. But yeah, that's super important. And I think probably one of the hardest barriers people get into when you start the real estate game is what do you start with? What kind of money do you have to start with? For me, I'm not always extreme, but when I really want something, I can be extreme with how I go about doing it. So I had a nice truck. It was paid off. I paid cash for it. And I decided I was going to sell it and get an older beater truck when I left the police department. The truck I had was nice enough. I was like, I don't want to take this and do construction with it. So I ended up
mhm.
getting an older truck. It was a good truck. And I sold the other one and I sold a bunch of other stuff. And we basically amassed about a little over 20 grand. And I remember going to my wife and saying, hey, that podcast I've been listening to? And she said, yeah. So here's the money. And I put the money down on the table. It was like 20 grand worth. And I said, we can either burn this and we'd be totally fine right now, or we can go buy a house. So she was like, oh, we might want to do the house route then. And so it was a bit extreme, but that sometimes is what I need to do for myself to be mentally really committed. And
Yeah.
I definitely made some mistakes on that first one. I've made plenty of mistakes since then, and I'm sure I'll make plenty more. But I had a bad property manager, and I did the vetting process that we teach, and it just goes to show that you can vet and you can do everything right that you're told and coached to do, and it doesn't always turn out right. Ended up firing that one, and I managed the rehab myself over the phone because, again, I'd never been to Ohio and had no interest in going there, and I was doing a totally different job in construction at this time, so it's not like I could drop what I was doing and go, and that would be about 6.5 hours for me. So just not no way. Managed that and then got a new property manager that took it over and he's been the one managing it ever since. So that was quite an experience
Nice.
trying to manage a rehab on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, and then even just taking it over too and having to figure it all out. We talked a little bit about coaching. What do you think about one of the biggest advantages that I see for coaching is how it helps you to shorten the learning curve. And I would like to know your thoughts on that, because it sounds like you went through some of the phases that everyone who gets interested in real estate goes through, right? They're like, oh, that's mildly interesting,
Mhm.
to like full bore 100 miles an hour, what I call the gorging phase of learning, where they're just like consuming everything they possibly can, YouTube videos, books, podcasts, and they can't get enough information. It's the next step, or the lack thereof, where people get tripped up, and which goes to your other point of taking action. And you force yourself in that position where you're like, hey, we're going to do this. Boom, money on the table. Let's go. From your perspective, do you really think that coaching kind of shortens, one, the learning curve, and two, how do you get people over that significant hump from learning to taking action?
Wow, that last one, the learning to taking action, that's a really good one. I would say the definitely I'm a big advocate of getting coaching. I know for me personally, I would not be where I am right now if I hadn't paid for coaching. Would not Just wouldn't happen. I'm a very much do not recreate the wheel. I don't like making mistakes. I have a bad personal habit of taking mistakes personally, and really not a good trait, but I know that about myself. So I was like, I'm going to mitigate this and pay for a course to go through all the videos, learn how to set up the LLC, learn how to find an area to invest, learn how to find a property manager, learn how to find the right realtors, and then start looking at property. So I learned how to build the business first instead of buying the property, then trying to build the business. So most people do that in the reverse order. They buy a house and they're like, now what? So we try not to do that. But as far as like getting people over that hump from learning to taking action, each person is so different. Their circumstances are so different. But for me, it was just the consuming of knowledge. And once I got to a point, I realized that I could constantly consume knowledge and never do anything with it if I didn't make the commitment to go do it. So, and I'm one of those guys, I can write a commitment letter out to myself and put it where I see it every day. That doesn't mean a hill of beans to me. Like it doesn't really motivate me. Helps a lot of people to see that, but it doesn't really do much for me. But when money was on the table, and that really motivated me, because I was taking stuff that I had set aside. Like I was fortunate when I was in the military to have a job where I was able to save 40, 50 grand over the course of 2 years. And I was very frugal. And that's something I've always been. It was pretty frugal. Like my first house I ever bought personally, I knocked on their door and asked if I could walk through it because I heard they were going to sell. And the next day I brought them a 1-sheet piece of paper saying, I'll buy your house for $125,000. Here's $100. And I'm going to go get financing. They didn't know what to do with me, and I didn't know that wasn't normal. And we closed in 14 days. So that's how I bought my first house. Again, way before I knew anything about real estate and rentals. But it just goes to show you there's multiple ways to do things. But at some point, I know for me personally, getting that coaching is what helped me go from the knowledge portion to the action portion. And the coaching that I did with Dustin, it's 6 months. But I'll be the first one to tell you, I did not buy a house in 6 months because I did not want to lose that money, right? I did not want to do it. And I made the commitment, but I still didn't want to do it. And the coaching is not necessarily what I would call expensive, but it's not necessarily cheap. And so I was like, I'm going to re-up. And so I did it again. And it was really funny because I was ongoing negotiation on this house. And I was paying attention to how other people were saying, like in the group coachings, I made this offer, here's the counter offer. It was contingent on, oh, what's contingent? What's that mean? And so I learned all those things and started utilizing them. And I ended up actually, because my coach didn't get back to me quite fast enough, and he's really quick, but it happened like within like a couple of hours. I was able to negotiate down, and it was funny. I forwarded him all the email traffic, and he said, yeah, that looks textbook great. Like that looks really good. So I was encouraged because it meant that I had absorbed and retained the knowledge. So it was really awesome for me. But the coaching and then getting around the right people that are where you want to be. So if you're hanging out with people you go to church with, the family members that literally have worked the same job for 30 years and they are just waiting to retirement for their pension and things like that, they a lot of times have a hard time understanding what you're doing and even why you're doing it. Like I think my in-laws think I'm nuts. They don't tell me that, but I'm pretty sure. But I was doing it so I could be there for my kids. I was homeschooled. I've never seen the inside of a classroom ever in my life. So most of my education came from just working and life and getting beat up a lot. But each person's so different. They got to figure out what's that action thing that goes from knowledge to action. They have to, I think when you start doing this, you'll start to learn what that thing is. But if you want to be assisted or have somebody help you with that, coaching, going to real estate meetups, listening to podcasts, and getting around the right people that are going to encourage you to be to go where you want to be.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point that I was going to say in my experience, that the network of people is just as valuable, if not more so, than the courses or whatever, the coaching, because they're the ones who are going through the same things that you're going through. Maybe they're 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of you, but having that as a resource is huge. And also for the motivational aspect, right? If you're having an issue and they can help you solve a problem, or if they need to kick you in the butt to get you to take that action because they know you're ready and you're just like, oh, I don't know, maybe this is the right deal. Sometimes you need that tough love of someone saying, dude, it's a good deal. Just do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. But when people say
So,
either you buy this or I'm buying it, it's probably a pretty good deal. And like I've seen people say that to other people. I'm like, man, if they don't buy it, I'm gonna buy it. But most definitely, like real estate meetups are great. Facebook groups are great just for learning. I will say
mhm,
be a little bit cautious with Facebook groups. There are people in there that want to share information. It's not always good information, and it's information they think is correct,
right.
but it's not.
I'd say that's true of Facebook in general,
Very
but
much
yeah.
so. Any social media, but just take all of that with a grain of salt. But if you hear something that you think is interesting, do a little bit of research on your own. And it never hurts to have a good lawyer that you can call and say, I heard about this thing. Is this real? Is this worth looking into? I remember, what was it? They came out with the beneficial owner information for LLCs this year. So many people were like, that's a scam. I thought it was a scam when it first came out, just because the way it was worded. That seems really strange. I'm like, why do they need that? And then sure enough, it was legitimate. But so just take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt.
Yeah, absolutely. And being a coach yourself, what are your recommendations for anyone who might be listening in terms of vetting coaches or coaching programs and really trying to figure out who is the right fit for them? Because there's so many different types of coaches, different types of programs. How does someone know if the program they're looking at, the price, is a good fit for them?
So I would say really to start with doing research into the companies or the individuals that you're talking about. So there's, like you said, there's lots of them. But for me, it comes down to morals and ethics. So if they're morally good people, if they're ethical people, if they treat people right, if they treat people well, if they do that kind of stuff and they're trustworthy and people speak very highly of them, that is a really good sign. That's a good individual. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that they have the right coaching or the right program for you. If you want to know, if my recommendation for finding the right kind of program / coaching, find out what type of real estate you're very interested in, whether that's like triple net leases, mobile home parks, multifamily syndications, single family, Airbnbs, midterm rentals, arbitrage, co-living, any of that stuff. I would say find some podcasts, get some audiobooks if you are not a big reader, but you like to listen to stuff, read books, all that stuff, and just start reading one or two and start getting into it and look at, does this make sense to me? Do I like the sound of this? And then I usually start with a book and then go to a podcast, because the book I
Mhm.
can sit and digest, and I'll write in the books. I used to never write in books, but I write in books a lot now. When I read them, I'll
I still can't do it. Yeah.
some people can't.
I it's a thing. I can't do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's totally a thing. I used to not, but then somebody gifted me a book that they wrote in, and I was like, "This is cool, because this is insight into that person's mind, like what they were thinking, going through, a connection they made." And I
Absolutely.
thought that was really neat. So I was like, I'm going to start writing in books, so that way when somebody reads this, maybe I connect a dot that they didn't see, and so therefore the book is more valuable for them. But that's really my biggest suggestion on how to find the right kind of coaching and mentors, is somebody that aligns with your values. I'm not a very flashy guy. I go to Walmart to get some jeans, and that's just me. I'm not flashy at all. That was one of the things I really liked about my coach. He was not flashy. It's like jeans, t-shirt, boots, or flip-flops, and that's about it. And I liked that because it was very simple. You knew what you were getting, and there was no surprises.
Yeah, and I think that is important. It's a matter of, do I resonate with this person, this program, whatever it is. When I was looking at it, one of the things that I thought about was there's these huge programs out there, and I was like, but if I'm with one of those, based on where I was at the time, like I would be talking to random coach, not the expert at
Mhm.
the top, because he has his sub coaches that he has deal with all the
Correct.
new
Yeah.
people. I decided to go with someone who was a much smaller scale, but was still doing, like you said, what I was interested in, commercial multifamily. But he was still at the level where it was one-on-one interaction,
Yeah.
and that's what I valued at that time, till I was ready to move on to something else. So it's, again, I think it's also a matter of assessing where you're at in
Mhm.
your real estate journey. If you're just starting out, maybe that appeals to you more, talking to the person that you're signing up with,
Totally.
having that one-on-one versus feeling like one of hundreds, I don't know, in one of these giant guru programs. And then the other thing is, like you said, that trusting your gut, right? If something feels off, or if you feel gross after the pitch, then it's probably not the right type of program for you. So just think of that. And then it has to be targeted,
Oh yeah.
like you talked about,
You have to know what you're
to what,
doing. You have to
right?
have
Because
the goal.
if you don't have that figured out, you can go to one of these sessions, like a meetup or some big seminar, something like that, which can expose you to different types of real estate. And
Oh,
I think that's super
I
valid.
totally forgot to mention, thank you for bringing that up. Real estate conferences are amazing.
Hmm.
Like truly. I have only been to one, but I've been to it 3 years now in a row. And that's my coaching mentor, Dustin Heiner's Real Estate Wealth Builders Conference. Just shameless plug right there. It's amazing. If you want to come and hear like really incredible, down to earth speakers, and these guys walk the halls with the rest of us and go into each other's sessions and listen. It's really phenomenal. Conferences are amazing. Now, I'm speaking from going to only one, so I hope I'm not setting the expectations super super high, but I will be going to probably FinCon this year, so I'm looking forward to broadening my horizons and as far as conferences go.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at, right? If you're like, hey, I heard about, I don't know, mobile home parks on a podcast, you're like, but I don't really know enough about it to get into that. And they're having a conference on mobile home parks in the town that you're at. Go to that conference. You will get a deep dive. You will drink from the fire hose, and you can walk out of there knowing whether that's something that you want to pursue or not.
Yep.
And I think that's super valuable too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I ended up with a small mobile home park having nothing about them. That was a fluke purchase, and I learned a lot. I will say that for sure. But yeah, that was definitely, that's one of those things that you want to know a little bit more about than I did when I first got into it.
Yeah, I haven't jumped into those waters yet. It intrigues me, but I'm not quite there yet. All right. And another thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the whole family aspect. You talked about family and how important that is to you. And I think you alluded to the difficulty in balance that you were seeing with your life while you were in law enforcement. When you transitioned to the real estate side of things, what did that balance look like, or how did it change once you started doing that? Because you could certainly spend just as much time focused on real estate, going to properties, underwriting, whatever the case may be. Did you find that your situation improved, got worse, stayed the same? What did that look like?
Yeah, so it was an interesting transition. So when I went from law enforcement, I decided I wasn't going to live off of my real estate income. So I didn't want to touch it. I wanted it to go right back in the business to be able to purchase more. And I still don't live off of it now. It just goes right back into business, and we buy more real estate as soon as the deal arrives, and whenever we're looking or somebody produces something that's very interesting and looks like it would be a good buy. But so I was working full time. I went into construction after law enforcement and helped my brother-in-law stand up a deck building company. So I did that for 2 years afterwards. So I was doing all of the real estate stuff at the same time had a full-time job. So I was a project manager right off the bat because I tend to do okay leading crews, right? So I was doing a lot of driving. So I got myself a headset, like a pair of like DeWalt headphones, like wireless headphones, Bluetooth. And so I would make phone calls while I was driving between job sites or to the landfill or something like that. So I was managing, like calling realtors, calling banks, just making these connections, building that rapport, building that relationship with these people. So that way, when the time comes, I could just make a phone call. They already know who I am, and then we're ready to move forward with a deal. And so I started doing that. And then I realized after a little while that I was giving so much time into my brother-in-law's company that I was actually hurting the amount of time I had for real estate. And real estate was where I wanted to be. I really enjoyed the construction aspect, but it didn't give me the time freedom I was looking for. So I ended up went to a small construction job for a little bit, then ended up going into the family house painting company in a sales position. I didn't own the company. My brother owns the company. So he was like, hey, you like talking? You probably make a really good sales guy. Let's get you trained a little bit and let you go. So, and I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed him giving me the opportunity. It was really good training, and actually it translates into real estate pretty well. But the funny thing was, once I started doing that, I was about 6 months in doing the sales, and my coach, Dustin, called me and he said, hey, I know you're coaching as well. You're doing that in the evenings and things like that with your students, but would you be interested in doing a podcast with Charles, who is the other coach for Master Passive Income as well? Would you two be interested in co-hosting a podcast? And I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. And my only concern is you don't have enough time. And that seemed to be the crux of everything. It wasn't money, it was time. Because I wanted time with my family. I wanted time to do the stuff that I wanted to do that maybe didn't produce money necessarily, but was really important to me. So he had said that, and I'm a Christian, I'm a believer. So I was sitting in my truck 30 minutes before he called me. It was like, God, I need more time. I don't have time. I want to do things that are more important to me than doing sales calls for a house painting company. Granted, it's my family company. I want it to succeed. And then he called me and I said, I don't have enough time. Okay, watch this. And I went in and gave my brother my 2 weeks right there. And he was on the phone when I told him that. And all he did was give me the thumbs up, like, oh, you made a decision. Good. See you later. That was it. And of course, Dustin laughed. He said, did you just quit your job so you could do a podcast where you're getting zero revenue and anything and you have no experience? And I was like, yeah, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do anyway. And he thought it was hilarious. But that goes back to I can take some extremes to go do something. And that was a very split second decision. And then I had to call my wife and say, so this just happened. But God bless her. She's amazing. She just said, I guess you better figure out like what we're actually doing to make money to pay bills since we're not touching the real estate stuff. And so I started a handyman company 40 days later, and that's what I've been doing since.
Awesome. Yeah, see, just got to find those solutions.
Yeah.
So my wife would have said the same thing. Okay, you lost one source of revenue. You better find another one.
Right.
So right now we do need to transition into the term. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I ask every guest on the show. Just ask for a quick, honest answer. You ready?
Got it.
All right. What is one red flag every investor should look out for?
Actually, it goes in line with what we were talking about before, is like bad coaches or people drawing people in for their coaching because they're flashy. I'm not a big fan of social media and things like that. And you get people that walking around their private jets and Lamborghinis and things like that. But if you look at these guys, are they happy doing what they're doing? But is that even their Lamborghini or their private jet? And I would be very cautious. Yeah, I'd be super cautious.
No, that makes total sense.
Yeah, so that would be one of my biggest things.
All right, next one. What is a myth about this business that you would like to set straight?
That this is for the super rich people to do. Everybody can do this. I think too many people think you have to be wealthy to do real estate and be an investor. That is absolutely not the case. Everybody can do it. It just takes a little bit of knowledge and determination, some grit to get going and get in the right rooms, like all the things we've talked about before. But everyday normal people can do this. I'm an everyday normal kind of guy, so it can be done.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. It's just a matter of, like you said, getting that education so that you know what you're doing, deciding what you want to focus on, and you can make it happen. All right, final question, William. What does success look like to you?
Well, this is a great one. I think success looks like for me where real estate personally takes care of all the bills with additional income, and I can decide what I'm doing for the week at the beginning of the week and then spend a lot of time with my kids and my family doing things with them that I enjoy. I want to raise my kids and have a lot of time with them. My dad worked really hard. I'm one of 7, and he worked really hard for us as kids, and I appreciate that. I love that, but I want to spend more time with my kids, but they laid the foundation for me to learn and be able to be where I'm currently at. So having more time with my kids and my wife is definitely very high on that list. Being able to volunteer time and not worry about pay.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. All right, William. Hey, this has been great. You gave a ton of value. Now, please tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you and if there's anything else that you'd like to share with them.
So the best way to get a hold of me, you guys have to forgive me. I'm horrible with social media, but I just got an Instagram going. So hopefully we'll actually start creating content. Not something I'm super great at, but william.c.parmer on Instagram should be the only one, Parmer. And also if you're interested in coaching, it's william@masterpassiveincome.com. And then you can go to masterpassiveincome.com to just check out the coaching and learn a little bit more about myself and Charles, the other coach, and Dustin.
Awesome. We'll have all those links in the show notes. Again, thank you for coming on, and I look forward to seeing you do big things on your journey to multifamily millions.
All right. Thanks. Awesome.
Have a good one.
You too.